Dr. Graham Hill is a criminologist and former senior investigating officer with the Surrey Police. During his career, Graham worked to solve some of the UK's most high-profile and infamous crimes, including the murder of Millie Dowler and the London Night Stalker Delroy Grant.
Someone has to be in charge. Someone has to bring the investigation towards its ultimate conclusion.
Graham, who specialises in child abduction and murder, assisted the Portuguese police in the investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. In this series, he's using his own insider knowledge and expertise to unpack the investigation from the inside out.
The public only ever sees the tip of the iceberg. I want to tell the full story and reveal how detectives brought a series of elusive killers to justice.
This is Murder Detective. Greenford is a London suburb with a population of around 50,000 people and an industrial history.
Greenford is an area of London that is in the borough of Ealing. It's got a high crime rate, a mixed population with a diverse community.
But in 2014, Greenford was rocked when a young man was attacked on its streets during Friday's rush hour.
This was a scene of absolute mayhem. A man lying in the road, stopping the traffic, passers-by all around rushing to see what they could help.
First aid was being given by a number of people, including a bus driver and a couple of other car drivers, because it was at the height of the rush hour.
Uniform officers would have been dispatched initially to respond to the report that somebody had been stabbed. Those officers would provide first aid in the first instance in support with the ambulance service, and then once the seriousness of the injuries that had been sustained were established, a call came into my office as the on-call homicide investigation team. I sent officers to the hospital who would have started to commence inquiries, check any ID documentation, any personal effects, and from there seek to identify who he was and make contact with the family.
The victim is 24-year-old Dean Maley. Police officers now call Dean's mother, Donna, to inform her of the attack.
There was a knock on the door, and it was two policewomen. So they came in and they said, "Do you have a son?" I said, "Yes, I've got two." And she said, "Dean Maley." I said, "Yes, my son." So she said, "Well, there's been an incident," she says, "and we need to take you to the hospital." I said, "The hospital? Why, what's going on?" So she said, "Something's happened." I said, "Well, what's happened?" She said, "Well, he's been stabbed." So I just didn't know what to do. I couldn't even use my phone. I didn't know how to use it. I took my phone out. She said, "You need to ring someone, like someone to come with you. We need to take you to the hospital now." And so I said, "Well, I need my daughter, Emma." I said, "She lives around the corner." She said, "Well, give me your phone." So the policeman took the phone and she found her number and she rang her.
And I had this phone call and they said, "Is that Emma?" And I thought, "Oh, who's playing silly buggers?" Like, because it come up, "Mum." And she said, "It's the police. You need to get to your mum's." And I said, "What's wrong with my mum?" She said, No, it's not your mum." I said, "Can you put my mum on?" She said, "No, your mum can't talk." So I said, "Well, what's happened?" She said, "There's been an incident." But I said, "Well, what?" And she said, "Well, it's Dean. He's been stabbed."
Donna and Emma were brought to St Mary's Hospital, where Dean was fighting for his life.
Previously, a few months earlier, I'd lost my husband, so we'd been at that hospital. And so as soon as she said that name to that hospital, I was a bit panicked.
My mum's thinking, "Oh, they must have got it wrong. It can't be Dean." But they ID'd Dean through like if you have a disability or you're elderly, you get a freedom pass. And that's how he was ID'd. So I knew it was Dean. And she was saying, "But they might have got it wrong." I think she was in denial to the fact that it was Dean.
I'd only been in there, I think, minutes, and the door burst open, and the man walked in, and he said, "We've been working on your son. He's He's had 18 pints of blood put into him. Nothing's happened. He's dead. And he just said it like that. I mean, I near enough just passed out. I was screaming. He said that he'd been stabbed through the heart and there was nothing they could do. They'd worked on him for an hour or an hour and a half. And then it was just a nightmare because you didn't know why. How could that happen? It was in such a short time that he'd left me at 10 to 4.
Dean was from Northolt, close to Greenford, and lived with Donna.
He was just a really good, fun child. He wanted to know everyone. He liked everywhere I went, he went. Everywhere Emma went, he went.
Together as kids, we was always together. And then when I was, a teenager, when I first was allowed out, wherever I was, he wanted to be. And I used to think, oh, God, go away. He was like the annoying younger brother. But we was always so, so close.
Dean had been born with a brain disorder which caused developmental issues, something Dean had learnt to deal with since his childhood.
He knew he had special needs, but he was more able than his other siblings, like the older ones.
He had microcephaly, it means where the brain was underdeveloped, and he used to try and hide that he had a disability. He didn't want people to know, like, if my mum would say, like, in conversation, he had a learning disability, he'd be sneering at her, giving her a right dirty look. He'd say, how dare you?
He used to make everyone laugh. He was a funny kid. And even as a child, he was always polite. And he carried that through to adulthood. He was, everyone that spoke to Dean said how friendly, nice he was, and offered to carry bags, and always said hello and thank you. Always. He talked to everyone. He just loved to talk to people.
Larger than life. We used to call him the man, Dean the man. Full of character and just loved by everyone.
Greenford in northwest London. 24-year-old Dean Maley, a well-liked and vulnerable local man, is found stabbed. Graham is travelling to Ruislip Road to find out how SIO Matt Bonner began the investigation in the hunt for Dean's attackers.
Here we are where Dean was murdered. Can you tell us what you did at the scene directly after the murder?
The first and most important part would be to secure the scene with a cordon, and so we'd place the cordon around the area where Dean was assaulted, and slightly wider cordon around the area where Dean had approached the scene and the suspects had come to and from. We then commissioned a detailed forensic examination looking for any evidence that might assist, finger marks or DNA or blood or anything that would help us identify who those suspects were, recognising the challenge that it's a busy public area, and so any forensic retrieval was going to be challenging.
I understand there was a number of witnesses that tried to help Dean.
Yes, so those members of the public came to Dean's aid. The witnesses had seen a group of males, but beyond that the description wasn't detailed enough to get a proper feel for who they might be and assist with the identification.
Dean's murder had an immediate impact locally.
I remember it was a very big shock to the community. It was on our doorstep, and I think it was sort of the first time that something so big and so shocking had happened that was sort of affected so widespread amongst the community.
We couldn't bury him straight away. Obviously, they had to keep him in the hospital. We had to wait, I don't know. How many weeks was it? I don't know. It was a while.
He had a massive funeral. We give him such a good send-off. He wouldn't be having a birthday again, or Christmas, so it was her way, she had the best flower, he had the beautiful flowers. My mum's whole front garden was covered, and there was such a good turnout. There was the press, all the press was there, and there was hundreds. It had to be put on the thing outside for people to see, because they wouldn't have fit inside. We let doves off for him, but we let two, so him and my dad.
When someone is murdered, obviously the media focus on the victim, rightly so, and the family. You don't actually see the effects that it has beyond that, and it does completely affect the community and beyond the community. You know, there's so many people, the ripple effect happens.
As the hunt for the killers commenced, Matt Bonner acted quickly to categorise the murder.
It was a Category B murder, and that was managed locally as a critical incident, and a full homicide investigation commenced.
Okay, so Category B, for what reasons?
So Category B, the identity of the offenders were not readily known, but the investigation, my assessment was the investigation could be readily managed with the resources that I had available to me.
Now, one of the things that I know from personal experience is how important it is to start making policy decisions early. So what were some of your really early policy decisions at the scene?
In any investigation, there's a range of lines of inquiry, such as CCTV, witnesses, forensics, but really there's a finite number of resources, and the challenge for an SIO is to understand where they're most likely to make most impact. And so I had assessed the scene, understand what was going on, and in terms of the staff that I had available to investigate, allocate those particular lines of inquiry. And in some cases that might be that you believe that the forensic retrieval is likely to identify suspects. In this case, I felt that it was going to be witnesses and CCTV collection. I believe that CCTV was likely to give me the first significant step in identifying the suspects.
As police began to gather CCTV, the immediate murder scene had been sealed off to the public.
The principle behind the cordons is to go big, so no forensic opportunities are missed if anything has been dropped either on the approach or the exit from the crime scene. What we pretty much quickly believed at that time was that after the stabbing, the three suspects had run off. They hadn't discarded anything.
The problem with this investigation was there was very little contact between the person that used the knife and Dean. So the usual forensic opportunities weren't available to the investigation team. The CCTV on this house became particularly crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. Initial assessment of the scene identified, you could see that those CCTV cameras straight away. We recognised that if they were real cameras, they were going to be critical, and that turned out to be the case. In fact, if the assault on Dean had happened anywhere else along this road, I don't think it would have been caught on CCTV. There were no other cameras that would have covered it at that time. So Graham, this is the CCTV from the scene, and as you can see, there's two cameras on the house. The first thing you see is Dean walking along the road there on his own, and he's approached from behind by firstly one male. And then a short while later, two more follow on behind. This is the other camera angle, and you see the first male approach Dean, and at this point, if you look in his hand here, you can see that he's got a knife in his right hand. The second two males are walking round and further up and block Dean's exit. You'll notice Dean's got his hands in his pockets. He never takes his hands out of his pockets. He's not a threat to anybody at all. The second two males now return and completely surround Dean. And without any provocation, Dean's stabbed in the chest.
Wow. And it sort of demonstrates how they sort of hunt him down, don't they? They sort of pin him against the sort of fence there, and then they sort of corral him in to a position, don't they?
We've talked about the importance that the CCTV had in terms of the actions of each of the people that were there. And this shows they were acting as a group. Mm-hmm. This isn't the actions of one person who's gone rogue. Really bravely, Dean actually starts to give chase. He follows them for about 4 or 5 steps, and then turns and staggers into the road looking for some help, where he's supported by members of the public.
Broad daylight, traffic going by, it's chilling, isn't it?
Absolutely terrible assault.
DCI Matt Bonner and his team were not aware of any obvious motive for the attack.
There was nothing in Dean's background to suggest that he would have had any fallouts with anybody whatsoever. And the actions at the time looked like a kind of unprovoked attack. And looking at what had happened on the CCTV, a working hypothesis for me was that this was a robbery that had taken place. And if it was a robbery, the things of value that Dean had were his jacket, he had a North Face jacket on, and his mobile phone.
I know in my heart he would not have given up his jacket or his phone. He wouldn't have done it, even though I would have said to him, give them what they want, just walk away, just give it. He wouldn't have done that. He loved clothes and trainers, and he'd, spend all his money on trainers and clothes and all, and as far as, it's fine, no one was having that off me. He wouldn't have let them take anything off of him.
I can always remember thinking, was he scared? And then I was thinking about him, did he think he was dying? And there was a police officer who was first on the scene. He tried to reassure me and he said, I don't think he was aware he'd been stabbed. He said, because he was moaning about his jeans being ripped. They were cutting the jeans off him because they have to go through the leg. He said he was screaming, shouting, ow, you're hurting me. So he said he was like he was oblivious to the stab wound.
It gave us real detail about what had happened, how many people were involved, and some good descriptive information about them. What did strike me, though, was that it was insufficient to actually identify the suspects from. The detail around facial recognition just wasn't there on the images, and the best information was around clothing and actions, what the people involved actually did. The most important thing that we took from the CCTV in terms of identifying the suspects was that the main suspect, the lad that was responsible for stabbing Dean, had a jacket on which had quite a distinctive white stripe or zip, and I felt that we could pursue that as a line of inquiry to see if we could capture or identify any other footage where we could find that same suspect, perhaps with a better, more detailed image.
Police were left in no doubt that the investigation would be difficult. But detectives knew that methodical police work and the video clues they had collected was most likely the best hope they had of closing in on Dean's attackers. On the 7th of February 2014, Dean Maley, a 24-year-old local man, became a tragic victim of knife crime in Greenford. Former senior investigating officer Graham Hill has been given insider access to the crime team on the case. He's discussing the progress in the first hours of the investigation with the SIO on Dean's murder, Matt Bonner.
Can we talk a little bit about open source and collecting data from various places? Talk a little bit about that.
The term open source will mean covers a range of information, but it's data that's being collected naturally anyway and is readily available, whether that's CCTV footage, ANPR data, telephone call data, quite readily available, but often there's a wealth of it, so you have to be quite careful. CCTV was always a priority for me in this case. Buses were really important. We knew he'd travelled to the area by bus, and so it was critical to identify who he was with when he got on. Did anyone sit next to him? Did he have an argument with anybody on the bus? And when he got off the bus, was there anyone following him? So we recovered the CCTV from the bus, which showed a completely non-eventful journey. He had sat on the bus and got off where he should. Now, we knew from his family that he was intending on visiting his uncle, but as he got off the bus, he actually walked away in a different direction. And quite tellingly, and I think sums up Dean perfectly, is as he walked away from the bus, he turned and gave the bus driver a friendly smile and a wave.
It was exactly a week from his birthday previously, like a week before, and he had wanted a tattoo, and there was a new tattoo shop further up the road.
He had birthday money, and he had two of my children's names, and he wanted to get, at the time I only had 3 children, and he wanted to get his name tattooed on him. And so he was walking back
That's the only reason he would have gone up, walking to where he was, and where they were loitering up and down, driving in their car. And then they saw him and thought, he's on his own, we'll do what we need to do.
Matt and his team had widened the search for CCTV evidence to local business premises nearby, from cameras on local transport.
I'd allocated a team of 6 officers who spent 2 or 3 days walking that area and recovering CCTV, and then once they'd recovered it, bringing it back to the office and spending hour upon hour reviewing to see what we had and see if there was anything relevant. So it was done quickly, but it was 16, 18-hour days of 2 or 3 days for 6 people.
Then the investigation team got a break. They found CCTV evidence of 2 men who seemed to correspond with known elements in the case.
We identified the footage from the fast food restaurant, which was of a male wearing an identical jacket to the knifeman at the scene. It was a much clearer and better image, but it still wasn't clear enough, and I was worried that if I circulated that image out, I would get lots of well-meaning members of the public and perhaps police officers putting forward a range of different names as to who they thought it might be. And that could present a risk to the investigation, because I'd have to deal with the other 10 or 12 names that might be put forward, and that it could actually end up delaying the time it takes to focus on the right name.
Detectives also looked back at some crimes in the community in recent months.
I sat down in the office with one of my detective sergeants, and we trawled through all the intelligence reports for Greenford over about a 2 or 3 month period. And what we were quickly able to establish was there had been about 3 or 4 robberies in that area. Quite significantly, a number of those robberies had targeted young men wearing North Face jackets, and we certainly know that Dean was wearing a North Face jacket on the afternoon that he was sadly stabbed to death. And through that intelligence, we were able to identify a young male by the name of Michael Mensa, and the fact that he was the owner of a light blue Fiat Punto. My team of officers who were out trawling for CCTV, we shared that information with them, and within about 5 minutes, they phoned back into the office to say, look, interestingly enough, we've picked up CCTV from the main shopping area where Dean would have had to have walked through on his way back home, and we have got a light blue Fiat Punto parked up outside the KFC, and that at some stage they were able to capture 3 youths going into the Punto and driving away from the KFC, almost shadowing Dean's walk back home.
Part of the CCTV that we had, we coincided and overlaid with a passing bus. The CCTV from the bus showed that they were getting into a blue Fiat motor vehicle. The bus caught the registration number, and that car was registered to Michael Mensa.
Detectives looked closely at Michael Mensa.
Michael Mensa was well known to police, and in the months preceding the murder of Dean, he himself had come to notice on a number of occasions. He was known to be involved in street robbery.
In the past few months, this man had been stopped by police, and in his car, the police found a samurai sword. After he was charged with possession of that weapon and released, he was then stopped some weeks later, and under his chair was a lock knife, and in his trainer was another blade. And on a third occasion, just a matter of days before this attack, Mensa had been involved in another attack in which they had succeeded in relieving another innocent youth of his phone and his jacket in order to sell.
Matt and his team knew Mensa was the man in the car, but they needed to be cautious about their next move.
There was a real dilemma, because As tempting as it was to make progress by arresting Michael Mensah, the one thing we could be sure about was that Michael Mensah wasn't at the scene.
One of the important things about investigating murder is continually evaluating risk. Now, there were two risky decisions that you made in the course of this investigation. The first one was around arresting Mensah.
Although he was the first identification, he wasn't the murderer, he wasn't the knife man. So the priority had to be to identify the knife man.
So you really made a calculated decision to not arrest him because you didn't want to alert the other three offenders and drive them underground.
Yeah, exactly that. Mensah's role only became significant if I had the other three and I could present that they were responsible for the murder and that murder was likely to be a robbery gone wrong, and that Mensah therefore had a role to play in the robbery as the getaway driver, for want of a better word.
But the police had something belonging to Michael Mensah which started to move things forward.
Shortly before Dean was killed, Mensah was arrested in possession of a knife, and the police seized his mobile phone. And they still had that phone in their possession when they identified Mensah's car and the men getting into the car.
The suspect in the white striped jacket was clearly a friend or associate of Michael Mensah. And it was reasonable, therefore, to consider that the phone that we had in police possession already, Michael Mensah's phone, within the contact list might be that person that had the white striped jacket.
Getting into Mensah's online and digital activity was a priority.
Open source is where you look for stuff that's in the public domain. So you look at people's Twitter account, you look at people's Facebook account. You don't need any special authority to go in and look at it. And because we live in a world which is intrinsically linked to those kinds of information platforms, the police are able to use that to identify people and piece together key bits of information.
We were able to identify that he had a contact by the name of Bones. What Matt Bonner did was to take that a step further and search Twitter using that street name of Bones, and a number of names came up, including this Bones Santana 97. And when he went into that account, he realised that there was a picture of the same young man wearing the same hoodie with a distinctive white zip. There was also a birthday greeting from his sister about a week before, on the 3rd of February, wishing her little bro Jamal a happy birthday. So we had a date of birth, we had a street name, and we had a first name of Jamal. We trawled our intelligence databases. It was clear that he'd never come to police attention before, which is why we then took the step that we would ask schools and colleges to search their databases for a young man by the name of Jamal with a 3rd of February 97 date of birth. And that's how we identified Jamal Jones and his home address in Acton.
Jones and Mensah were now identified. Matt Bonner needed to make a critical decision. Jamal Jones was an unknown quantity.
I'd now identified somebody in Jamal Jones who I believed was responsible for the murder of Dean, and I couldn't run the risk of leaving him out on the streets for a second longer than was necessary. And so I made a decision that we would arrest Michael Mensah and Jamal Jones and then turn our attention to the other two at a later stage. I handed over the tactics of planning the arrest of Jamal Jones to a specialist team.
We probably could have done those entries ourselves, but it comes with an element of risk, and by using the TSG you eliminate that risk, and it's always safer to do these kind of entries at about 6 o'clock in the morning.
Jamal was called out to the front door by armed officers behind shields who put a red dot on his chest and instructed that he follow their instructions. Clearly the assessment was that he was a dangerous individual. He'd been suspected of being responsible for a murder. But what was surreal was that as that was happening, the police helicopter hovered up over the rooftops as well. So we used all of the toys available for that arrest. At the same time and on the same day, but at a different location, we arrested Michael Mensah and seized his vehicle. Jamal Jones had never come to notice with the police. He'd never so much as been stopped and searched. He had no previous convictions, no previous arrests. And there was a moment when I identified Jamal as a suspect and looked at the intelligence that was available to me about his background, that I had second thoughts as to whether we had the right person.
A search of Jamal's address helped Matt with his suspicions.
We searched specifically for the clothes that were seen on the CCTV, and it simply wasn't there. We can say for certain that it had been disposed of. And that in itself was significant, because this is a jacket that he had worn to do his street robbery in. He wore in every photo that we had on his social media profile. Yet lo and behold, now he decided to get rid of it. So we felt that that was really important evidence, actually, that the jacket wasn't there. We found the knife in his house hidden. We never recovered it and identified it as the murder weapon. But clearly interesting that here's someone that's now gone from not at all the right profile, and are we sure that this is the right name we've put to the suspect? All of a sudden, here's a man who's got rid of his jacket that matches the jacket worn by the suspect, has a knife hidden in his bedroom. Now we're getting closer.
Let's talk about how you use the media to get your message out.
I then had to think about what I was going to release and at what time, and that took some careful thought as well. We had charged Mensah and Jones, and it was attached to the press release to say that we are still looking for these other two. I felt that the people in the world that were most interested in what had happened to Mensah and Jones were going to be those two other suspects, their best friends. I didn't know how that was going to work. I didn't know what it was going to provoke. I hoped that there'd be a split loyalty and someone would phone us and tell us who those other two people were.
What actually happened was what Mark Bonner would have least predicted.
What I didn't expect was those two people themselves to walk into a police station and say, I understand you're looking for us.
Ryan Beresford, who is known as Grills, and Miguel Lieber, who's known as Butch, turned up at the local police station saying, right, look, you've posted our picture in the paper. What is this all about? They were immediately arrested for the murder of Dean. So it's fair to say that sort of within a week or so, we've identified the four young men. They've been arrested and they're now remanded in custody.
The suspected murderers were behind bars, but the team still needed to prove they had committed the crime. In northwest London, the suspected killers of 24-year-old Dean Maley, a well-liked and vulnerable local man in February 2014, had been caught and are awaiting trial. Senior Investigating Officer Matt Bonner and his team were busy preparing for prosecution.
Getting any investigation to the point of charge is kind of where the hard work starts, not where it ends. All of the pieces of work that have been done to identify the suspects and justify the arrest and inform the interviews, all of that work needs to be translated into admissible evidence that can stand up to the scrutiny of an Old Bailey trial. So it's a case of making sure that statements are taken from everybody that needs to be interviewed, searches have all been done, exhibits have all been submitted, any forensic opportunities have all been explored, CCTV has been compiled in a way that it can be presented properly at court and understandably, because of the hours and hours of CCTV footage that we recover, there's 30 seconds that's relevant to show in the trial.
It was a real eye-opener to know how they tracked people. Like, they were able to get onto Facebook accounts and Twitter accounts and track, what the clothes. They were able to track the clothes that this boy had on, and it was his, and it just amazed me, because I looked at it and I thought, Never in a million years are they going to be able to find these people. And the short time it took them to find them, it was amazing.
He was able to capture these 4 men and have them in custody, charged with Dean's murder within 10 days. And that is very, very good investigative police work.
One of the challenges was to connect Michael Menser to the prosecution, who had not been on the CCTV footage.
What happens after the assault, Graham, is that as soon as Dean is stabbed, together they all run off back in the direction that they've come. There's no confusion in terms of which way should we go, what have you just done. You can tell from the actions that they're acting together and it's part of a plan.
The fact that they all run off and go directly back to Menser's car where he's waiting for them, that was an important part of you proving joint enterprise.
Yes, without that evidence of this kind of joint enterprise, they were all acting together, we would have struggled to prove that point at court.
And letters from Michael Menser, written in prison, produce even more damning evidence.
Menser writes to Jones, telling him 3 things. 1, don't tell them, the police, that I gave you the knife. Secondly, he's saying to Jones, if you are going to have a defence of that you acted in self-defence, then tell them that you were drugged up, and particularly on Molly, which is street slang for ecstasy. And thirdly, Menser says, there's no way they can prove joint enterprise against me because there was no enterprise to join, which shows a staggering lack of knowledge of the law, because that's exactly what he was guilty of, quite plainly.
We made an application to the Ministry of Justice to get that intelligence turned into evidence, because now we could clearly say that although Michael Menser was 400 yards down the road, he'd clearly orchestrated the events as they tragically unfolded that afternoon.
In August 2014, the 4 suspects in Dean Maley's murder went on trial at the Central Criminal Court at the Old Bailey.
All 4 defendants appeared in the dock at the same time at the Old Bailey. Only Jones at that time could not be named because he was underage. So in terms of media coverage, it was only those who were 18 that could be named. The prime piece of evidence was played right at the beginning. Simon Dennison QC warned the entire court that the CCTV evidence is extremely harrowing, and it was true. In my 23 years working at the Old Bailey, I don't remember a more chilling piece of film than watching this poor boy dying on camera.
After just 4 hours of jury deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict.
Jamal Jones was convicted of Dean's murder and sentenced to life with a recommendation that he serves a minimum of 17 years. Michael Menser was convicted of a joint enterprise manslaughter, so he was found to have been part of a gang who all knew what they were doing. They were out to rob somebody, it happened to be Dean, and that his role was to drive the car and drive the suspects to the scene and away, so he was as guilty as anybody else. He was also convicted of another unrelated robbery, and he was sentenced to 17 years. Miguel Lieber and Ryan Beresford were both convicted of joint enterprise manslaughter and were given 15 years in custody each. But the judge made it clear that they were all responsible, and he used the line, they all had blood on their hands.
After the verdicts had been returned, Judge Martin Ziedman lifted the restrictions on the media which had banned them reporting the name of Jones, saying that it is in the public interest to give as much information in the public domain about this terrible murder, because the public awareness of the dangers of knife crime could not be underestimated.
They screaming, shouting, jumping up, kicking the box, crying. So that gave me a bit of pleasure, to be fair. It did. I won't deny it, because that was the only, not that it was a pleasure, but it was the smirk was on, it'd been wiped off their face.
I don't think it's bothered them they killed Dean. I think it bothered them that they were caught and that they've been in prison. I honestly do not think they were bothered they've killed someone, took someone's life away, or what the consequences they've done to our family.
Did the sentences bring any form of closure to the Maley family?
I personally don't think that any investigation gives closure. I think it gives the victim and their family a sense of justice. And I think in this particular case, Matt Bonner and his investigation team were able to give the family of Dean Maley justice.
Clearly the family will never forget Dean, and nor should they, but it goes some way towards helping heal some of those emotions, knowing that you know what happened and who did it. I've dealt with some where you don't get to that point, or where you don't manage to identify every suspect involved. And that can be harder for families to deal with, knowing that the next person that they walk past in the street might be the man that was responsible.
I think it just affected the community so bad because of how he was and how vulnerable. You know, no one takes kindly to that, do they? Every birthday and anniversary, we go there, as well as to the cemetery, and we put flowers up. And like, even though he's ashes at the cemetery, that is where he last was. So for us, it's more of a comfort thing, you know, to go there. And so I suppose as well, it's not forgotten about.
We did get justice. They went to court, they were found guilty. They done their sentence, but ours is a life sentence. We haven't got him. It upsets me to think that they are going to be coming out and they are going to have a life. They're going to go home to their parents still treat them and see them. I can't see Dean. Might have to go to the cemetery to visit him. Nothing like. I don't really talk about it, to be fair, because I don't like to upset other people, but every day is the same. You wake up and all you think is that day. Nothing ever changes.
Matt Bonner and his team's tireless work and determination paid off in the hunting of the killers of Dean Maley.
I look back now with the passage of time, and I'm particularly proud of this investigation, and I pay tribute to the amount of work that my team put in. And I think everyone from Matt downwards contributed massively to the successful conviction of 4 violent young men.
Everybody had a part to play, from those that were doing CCTV, those that were doing statements, the forensic teams, right the way through to the case officers that took it through to court and did all the paperwork. A genuine team effort that I was proud to lead.
This was an outstanding piece of police work. They didn't have a lot to go on, but they were able to piece together lots of bits of information which on their own don't seem to be a lot. But when you start to piece them together and build up a picture and overlay them, you start to see that what Matt did is he made timely decisions, he acted quickly, and to be able to arrest all 4 offenders within 10 days and then get them to court within 8 months and convict them is an outstanding piece of police work.